Hey guys, it's Quinn, and today we're going to be taking a look at Timothy Dalton's second and final venture as Bond in 1989's License to Kill. Right off the incredibly underrated yet financially lackluster The Living Daylights, the Bond series decided to follow the trend of other 1980s summer blockbusters like Die Hard and Lethal Weapon in creating a very gritty, slightly darker action film with a lot of violence and coldness. Sounds a lot like a Craig film, doesn't it? Well, it wasn't quite 2006 yet, but this film definitely started a trend towards more serious Bond films in the future. But how did Bond turn serious drama fare in its first outing? Well, let's find out as we take a look at the notoriously gritty 1989 Bond adventure, License to Kill. After a gun barrel with the violent streaks right out of Hitchcock's Psycho, we cut to Bond and Felix Leiter en route to Leiter's wedding, when they get pulled aside to go on a quick mission. After Leiter seemingly forgets he's on his way to his own wedding, we cut to a 1980s Spanish soap opera where we meet this film's main villain, Franz Sanchez, who's immediately getting this shit show on the road by whipping his girlfriend and cutting the heart out of a guy's chest. It's 2 hours of this, fellas, so get ready. Long story short, Sanchez escapes in a plane. And I'm not a big aviation guy, so maybe I'm wrong, but Bond and Leiter catch up in a helicopter, which doesn't seem possible, but hey, they catch Sanchez, so that's cool. Bond and Leiter helicopter into the wedding like it's nobody's business. Sanchez has been captured and everybody gets laid. And that is License to Kill. Well, you would think, but really we got 2 more hours, so let's just crank through this. After what I think is a super underrated title song with an equally overrated title sequence, we cut to Sanchez trying to bribe Americans to get out of his cell. We then cut to Leiter's wedding, and I think now is a better time than ever to address this, so I want to talk about Leiter in this film. As you guys are aware, Leiter appears throughout the series going all the way back to Dr. No in 1962, and I can confidently say that this was, and even to this day is, the best rendition of Leiter that I've seen. He has a ton of personality, seems like the kind of bastard who would be friends with Bond, and as we will see, the fact that the two are able to make a genuine connection early on in this film helps propel the, genuineness of what develops throughout this film. He's one of the best parts of this movie, and I'm equally happy that the actor they chose for it was the one who starred in Live and Let Die. So kudos to this film for that. While the wedding is going down, one of the Americans evidently accepts the bribe as they crash the truck that is transporting Sanchez into the waters in the Florida Keys, and Sanchez is able to escape. We cut right back to the wedding where Mrs. Leiter makes a joke about how Bond should get remarried, when Bond, clearly sad, pretty much shuts down the joke in a reference to Honor Majesty's Secret Service when he is actually married in that film. 10 out of 10 reference right there. Proud of the series for putting that in here without really making it feel forced. Anywho, Leiter gets his shit kicked in later that day, and his wife gets killed by Sanchez's men, and then Leiter gets tortured by a shark where he gets his leg bitten off. I'm telling you guys, we are 20 minutes into this film, and it's edgy as hell. Moving forward, Bond discovers a dead Mrs. Leiter and a barely conscious Leiter himself, and baby, this is where the plot gets moving. Bond is pissed as hell and recognizes that Felix Leiter was clearly bitten by a shark. Bond and a friend decide to go hunt for someone who would own a shark so they can kill them. Bond discovers the place, which he returns to that night. So that night he returns and I think does probably the darkest thing I've seen in this series up to this point by feeding the American who betrayed Leiter to a great white shark. This continues a trend we see throughout pretty much the film of Bond not really giving a shit about human life. It's a turn that is really believable based on how this film starts, and indeed it makes the film really unique from all the Roger Moore films before it. But one could definitely see why this film wasn't as successful as those prior to it. This film definitely isn't a family film, so yeah, there's that. Anyways, for acting like a psycho, Bond is brought to a house with a bunch of exotic cats. Blofeld, maybe? Is this entire drug ring and near death of Leiter a massive ploy by Bond's arch nemesis to lay vengeance on Bond for years of torment and betrayal? Nope, we'll have to wait till 2015 Spectre for that insane plot. But what we do get is Bond getting into a pissing match with M, where Bond decides incredibly impulsively to resign after 27 years of service. So now we get a rogue agent in the field, 007, coming after Sanchez. Bond ends up on a ship, and I'm not skipping any plot points, that just sort of happens, which makes no sense, but whatever, with Sanchez's mistress, Lupe, and the shark wrangler, Milton, on board. Bond also finds Leiter's friend Sharky from earlier dead on board. How Bond gets on the ship and how Sharky got killed are two things I've never understood how they happen in this film, and usually it's pretty unfair to pick, out plot holes in Bond films because they all have many. A certain film called Die Another Day comes to mind, but the fact that Bond ends up on the ship and Sharky is dead are both, well, especially the former, incredibly significant as the film happens, and they're explained with no rationale. It's kind of annoying, especially how serious this film tries to take itself. Regardless, Bond goes on a minor murdering spree before intercepting the drug trade that is occurring next to the ship on a plane. After nearly getting killed by like 5 snorkelers, Bond shoots a harpoon into the side of the plane, which was involved in the drug trade, and after a really badass little bit where he water skis behind the plane, Bond commandeers the plane and flies away with all the money on board. Bond sneaks back into Leiter's house and uncovers a hidden CD that Leiter hid of CIA informants within Sanchez's ring. One of them, Pam Bouvier, who later will become this film's Bond girl, was set to meet up with Leiter in the next few days, so Bond goes to inspect. We then get one of my personal favorite scenes in the film between Bond, Pam, and this film's henchman Dario, who is played by an incredibly young Benicio del Toro, and what I believe is one of his first feature films. We will discuss all of these characters at the end of the review, but needless to say, this scene really has some star power in it. There's a lot of great little bits in this fight scene here, but one thing I really enjoy is how the dancer in the middle of the bar pretty much just keeps going for the entire length of the fight. You gotta respect that dedication for those tips. Also, 2 beers for $3.50 in an American bar? I mean, Jesus. Anyways, Bond and Pam go at it because the boat broke down, so, why not? But they agree to have her fly him out to Sanchez's headquarters in Isthmus City. Isthmus City doesn't exist, but Isthmus does. And it's pretty much Panama, so I'm calling this place Panama from now on. Bond does a nice little bit of sexism.
It's Ms. Kennedy, and why can't you be my executive secretary?
To our friend Pam in Panama before they establish just a fuck ton of credit at the local bank in what ultimately is a pointless scene, but one that is weirdly entertaining just for the number of stupid jokes that are made here, whether it be a heavy suitcase or the blatant corruption going on. It's top notch. After a nice little cameo for my favorite character in this film in the form of Professor Joe, who pretty much helps Sanchez sell cocaine through lousy donations to his church, we get an entire bit of Bond earning just a ridiculous amount of money at the casino before he meets Sanchez, who, it is important to note, does not know who Bond is. Bond pretty much pretends that he wants to work for Sanchez, which is one hell of a clever way to link Bond to the main villain, and I have to give kudos where it's deserved. We're only an hour in, and the build-up to this film is a lot more interesting than most of those before it. Pretty much to summarize what happens, the next evening Sanchez agrees to take a bunch of Asian businessmen to his main operation, and afterwards, Bond attempts to assassinate Sanchez when he sees Pam in the other room with Sanchez's head of security. Weird, I know, but even weirder is what happens next. Oh wait, this is pretty much the weirdest 4 minutes in the entire Dalton era. Bond gets taken out by some kung fu people who turn out to be working for Hong Kong Narcotics, which is its own racial mess, but he's then taken to some outhouse where he, along with a few no-name characters, they're all killed by Sanchez. Bond, of course, lives somehow, but they're all killed by Sanchez's men. We get roughly a minute-long sub-story, though, about this one Asian chick who weirdly takes over the entire film with a whole character arc of tears, anger, and then death, before Sanchez discovers Bond and takes him back to his house. We then get this shit show with my favorite little random bit maybe this film where Bond wakes up. Like, why? Bond leaves and pretty much finds out that he's fucked up in operation planned with the Attorney General, who in real life is Dick Thornborough, U.S. Attorney General under the H.W. Bush administration in 1989, who granted to the head of security who Pam was talking to earlier. Okay, this entire subplot doesn't matter. I'm not even going to go into it. It's very complicated. Who cares? What matters is Bond convinced Sanchez that someone in his operation is a snitch and must be eliminated, leading to probably the most cold thing we see until 007 drops 006 off a satellite 6 years later in GoldenEye. It's a long story how this goes down. Pretty much it happens in real time in the film, so I'm not going to explain it. But Bond causes all of this to happen directly, and he watches them kill this guy in a pressure chamber. It's crazy. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this in a Bond film. And part of it is really interesting and edgy how this happens, but part of it is a bit too dark for my liking. I understand Bond being pissed, and I understand that these are, by and large, horrible people. But Bond, to me, has always been a man who's fought for the government to do what's supposedly right, and something almost feels morally wrong by the actions he's taken throughout this film. It makes me feel a little uncomfortable, I'll be honest. Anyways, Bond bangs Sanchez's girlfriend, Lupe, which is dangerous to say the least. That's how the guy at the beginning of the film got killed. And Pam finds out, and she's, not too happy. But you gotta hand it to Bond, creating a love triangle between him, a CIA agent, and the girlfriend of a global drug kingpin. I mean, hey, good man. So Bond is allowed to go to the lab with the Asian investors, and this is where it all comes to a head. Not only is the lab at my guy, Professor Joe's place, but Dario, the assassin from earlier who tried to kill Bond, you remember the Benicio del Toro character, he's also there and quickly recognizes Bond. Meanwhile, as a side note that doesn't matter, my guy, Professor Joe, and Pam start to get it on when she mugs him, and we get a nice little line.
Bless your heart.
Love this guy. Love him. Bond, meanwhile, puts the entire place up in smoke and tells Sanchez about a plan to steal stuff that my guy Dick put together, thus alerting Sanchez of a plan put together by an entire nation just to save his ass. Selfish? Definitely. Hotel Trivago. Bond is sent down a wood chipper machine thing where he and Pam proceed to kill Dario in a pretty fucking brutal way. Again, interesting, definitely. Teetering on the edge of too edgy? Probably. Sanchez skedaddles and Bond and Pam give chase in a plane, but not before Pam rips off this legend one more time.
Bless your heart.
Bond eventually takes control of one of the containers containing oil and cocaine, which is a fantastic chase sequence all around and is one of the best in the series. I could highlight it for many reasons, whether it be the creativity of how each truck is taken out one by one or by the fantastic close quarter fighting, but I think this one bit sums it up pretty nicely. Well, after a whole ordeal of Bond crashing, pretty much blowing up every single car, and Sanchez doing probably the most noble thing in this film by killing Mr. 1980s greed is good Wall Street, we get a fantastic final showdown between Bond and Sanchez, where Sanchez is about to execute Bond. Bond shows him the lighter he has from Felix Leiter and puts him up in flames. I mean, hell, that's just what a way to kill a drug kingpin. Fantastic way to end that entire arc between the two as well. Bond and Lupe have their final flirt when Bond runs into Pam and Q, and of course Bond decides to do the first moral thing he's done in this film as well, and go after Pam instead. The two make up, even though Bond just made out with Lupe, which, my God, the man's a player. Lupe goes with the president of Panama, mind you, as her second choice. That's the last thing she does in this film. I mean, good man Bond. So the two make out, that being Bond and Pam, and we get a horrible exit with a pan over to a fish and this horrible romantic song. And that, my friends, is how they end the Dalton era. That is the end of the madness that is License to Kill.
How many times can one man leave you breathless?
Wow, where to begin on this one? This is probably the first Bond film where I had to walk away from creating my review for a few days to really digest this film, because this film is so different from the Bond films before it that it makes it more difficult to analyze. But coming back on it, I realized what had troubled me was how they portrayed Bond. Bond in both Dalton films, but especially this one, is one bad MF. And on one hand, it is almost not appropriate for kids. I mean, both of his films are incredibly complicated compared to the likes of Moonraker, and the violence warrants a PG-13 rating. But I have to say, I really enjoyed this movie this time around. Bond as a character is just all around a lot more interesting in this film than definitely any time during the Roger Moore era, and maybe only in On Her Majesty's Secret Service and From Russia with Love before it is Bond more unique of a character. Dalton's portrayal is just so unique and refreshing that although this film is in a lot of ways a destroyer of the franchise for a few years, what doesn't kill you make you stronger. And if it took a film like this to make sure that A View to a Kill never happened again, I'm okay with that. Dalton, I think, stood up to the challenge of playing a more edgy Bond, and I think he did it with great success. And I guess that's what bleeds into the film as a whole. It's no doubt a Bond film. It fits the formula through and through. But in adding its own twists, you don't quite know what's going to happen at many points, and this is because of the dynamic between Bond and Sanchez. The two are tied at the hip for so much of the film. Obviously because Bond wants to kill Sanchez, and because Sanchez doesn't know who Bond is. But because there isn't just a plain, the two want to kill each other the second they see one another, there's a sort of cat and mouse game of trying to be in control of the situation between the two. That's something we haven't seen in a long time. And having this sort of different element between the characters is something that I think is also true a lot of the supporting characters as well. Pam is a good Bond girl. Not amazing, but she's fun, and the fact that she's a CIA agent is really cool. Sanchez is a great villain, actually, and I think gets lost in the fold because this film isn't as well known outside of the Bond universe. His whole focus on loyalty is very believable, and how he embraces Bond for his perceived loyalty was a part of the film which, if the character had been written poorly, would not have been believable. But they did it successfully here, which, as I mentioned when Bond and Sanchez first met, makes you wonder what will happen next for pretty much the entire second half of the film, because the two, inadvertently or not, put themselves in such precarious situations. Also, a quick shout out to my man Q for being a major player in this film. I didn't really address this during my recap of the film, but he's in there for a solid hour, which I loved. I was happy for him to get some screen time. Lupe wasn't a huge fan of. I think that, a lot of her motives didn't really make sense, but, she's there, she's fine. Switching gears, this isn't to say that this film doesn't have its faults. The plot jumps around without explaining how a lot of things happen. Importantly, why does Lupe become so insanely attracted to Bond so quickly, and to a point where she risks her life for him pretty much throughout? Why does Bond end up on Milton's ship during the drug deal? How? How could he have known to be there at that time? Why is he amazing at blackjack? And that is the reason that he got Sanchez's attention, and that's how the two became buddies. How does Leiter's friend Sharky get killed? I'm serious, all these things should matter, yet none get explained. Regardless, however, I was really impressed with this film and with the Dalton era as a whole. It's unfortunate that the Dalton era gets overlooked, and it's, for many reasons, significantly that it did bad at the box office, but it's a shame nonetheless because I think he was a really good Bond. Although I couldn't give this film probably a numerical rating, rest assured when Bond 2020 comes out and I have to re-rank these Bond films yet again, I'm pretty confident that this film will get into or at least be close to the top 10. It's a very smart, darker Bond film that has a whole hell of a lot more moving parts than most of its predecessors. I finally get why this film has such a hype around it, and I think it's well deserved. If he could have gotten one more film like this in the early 90s, I think his era would have been looked at as the gold standard for the revitalization of the Bond series to what it is today. But as we know, License to Kill was the last film in the Dalton era, a capstone to what I believe to be a brilliant two-film outing for old Timothy. The box office and producers disagreed at the time, however, and the series pretty much shut down for 6 years. But in 95, with the new Bond at the helm, the series was back, baby. Would the film be gritty like Dalton or funny like Moore? Well, the Bond series had one chance to save itself, and that chance was Pierce Brosnan's first and, in my opinion, best Bond outing, 1995's GoldenEye. So what do you guys think of License to Kill? And what do you guys think of Timothy Dalton overall as a Bond? Please be sure to leave your opinions in the comment section below. And as always, like, share, comment, subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.
What about the money, patron?
Launder it.